Henry Kissinger once declared that the victory of a third-class peasant power, Vietnam, over the United States would be disastrous. Many Pentagon officials argued that American firepower would inevitably defeat the Vietnamese communists. When I used to come here to report the war, I wondered by contrast whether the Americans could even know what was going on, let alone win. Hardware was no match for Marxist-Leninism. Ho Chi Minhville, Saigon, Ho Chi Minhville. Saigon was a sassy town, a river city on the edge of the delta, the capital of South Vietnam during the war which ended in northern victory in 1975, now the second city of a communist Vietnam. This is one of the world's poorest countries, still exhausted by endless war. Today, Vietnam is largely cut off from the world to its west. And since I have been critical of the policies of the communist government, I was rather surprised, as well as very pleased, when they allowed me back to travel up the Mekong. I found coming to Saigon during the war very passionate as well as tragic. Ho Chi Minhville is much quieter, but it arouses many of the same conflicting emotions. I've always been troubled by the way in which I could come in and out of Vietnam's agony. My old seat-tow driver, Sung, met me outside my hotel. We were pleased to see each other.
I like your shirt, Uncle Sam.
He was still wearing the American T-shirt I had given him last time I was here, 2 years ago.
Today we were very happy.
Well, I'm very pleased to see you again. I'm happy too. And I'm happy to be in Saigon. We go to the town hall.
It's a hard way to feed a family. He has many competitors and few customers. Vietnam's present allies, the Russians, are not so numerous or so rich as the Americans.
Hello. What's your name?
There were always children begging in Saigon. So too in Ho Chi Minhville. There is massive unemployment today. Some of these children have no place in the new society. They are the children of the bar girls and their long-gone American friends. In the old days, wretched GIs plucked from the ignorant and often innocent heart of America fondled wretched girls plucked from the equally blameless fields or back streets of South Vietnam. The communists would later insist that thousands of such girls be re-educated. Those who did not flee with the Americans in the last panic-stricken days of the war hoped for the reconciliation of the country. But reconciliation after bitter civil war is not so simple. Around 200,000 Southerners were imprisoned without trial, and even Southern communists have been excluded from power by the North. The regime has broken many promises. In some ways, it's hard to believe that the Americans were ever here. On the streets of Ho Chi Minhville, only the trinkets of war remain, at least on public view, for sale in one of the private street markets, which are run by the sort of Saigonese entrepreneurs for whom Hanoi's communism has not held much allure.
My dong. 200. 100.
This market is still very much as it was, though many other merchants have fled.
100. 150. 150.
Okay.
Okay? Wonderful. I hope I got enough, sir.
Boat people have replaced war as the Western image of Vietnam. But there are still delightful places in Ho Chi Minh City. In 1981, I remember talking in such a cafe to a girl who was desperate to escape the communist dictatorship. Around 500,000 Vietnamese have fled abroad since 1975. I heard nothing from my friend for 2 years, and I was afraid she must have drowned or been killed by the pirates who prey upon the boat people on the open sea. Later, I heard to my relief that she had survived and was still here, living somewhere else in Vietnam. The quality of a journey often depends on one's companions.
Well, tell him it's a great honor. If I ever go to America, I shall insist that Jason Robards or someone is my driver.
I was accompanied by 3 high-powered guides from Hanoi television. Hong was known as a champion fixer. Tuk was the human face of Vietnamese communism. She was one of the most patient people I have ever met. And with me, her patience was needed.
Name of the film is Undeclared Assassin.
Dang was not just a driver, he was also a film star.
And did he ever play an American officer?
They were an unusual team. Despite the strains of the journey ahead, we were to remain good friends. We drove to Ben Tre province, where I was told my journey was to begin. The first of the boats I took was a car ferry across one of the Mekong's many branches. It was a great pleasure to be here on the water at last. My guides wanted me to find the Mekong a river of solidarity amongst the countries of Indochina, Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam. I wondered if this was a notion which had struck many of the people of the Delta. is here that the river ends its long journey from Tibet through Southeast Asia and debouches through 9 dragons' mouths into the South China Sea. In the streets, I was constantly surrounded by people, especially children, who assumed I must be a Russian. I'm afraid I took pains to point out that this was not quite so. There are hundreds of ferries on the thousands of miles of waterway in the delta. But the local communist authorities wanted me to travel in isolation on an official day. Still, after long negotiations by Tuk, I was allowed to take a real passenger boat up the river. There were to be many such arguments. With me, here as everywhere, went several white-shirted policemen, ever vigilant, often obstructive. Vietnam is a police state. Bad for paranoids like me. As I left Ben Tre, I had no idea of how far I was going to be able to travel up the Mekong. But I hoped at least to cross into Cambodia, and then on up to the temples of Angkor Wat. Maybe also beyond to Laos and Thailand. The only certainty was that it would all be decided by politics, not by the niceties of navigation. Every other day, this ferry leaves for Vinh Long en route to Can Tho, the capital of the delta. This is the richest area of Vietnam, the rice basket, marvelously abundant, unlike the north. For northerners like Tuk, the comparative wealth of the south is sometimes a shock. As I travelled through wide stretches of rivers and tiny creeks, I thought how crazy it was for the Americans to have imagined that even with all their high-powered boats, they could ever hope to control these myriad waterways. Not surprising that the Southern Uprising began here, and not really surprising that great war machines could be blown asunder by people in black pajamas. The provincial communist cadres introduced me to a Viet Cong naval commander still living in the area.
Can you ask the commander how he actually sank this boat?
Ông muốn hỏi là đồng chí đã làm thế nào đánh đắm được cái thuyền?
Ở đây thì theo chúng tôi đó là đánh thả theo dòng nước, tức là dùng bánh xe đó, thường bánh xe nó treo thân tàu này, thì mình mới thọc cái cây ngắn ngang qua cái bánh xe đó để ốp sát vô cái thân tàu.
Nhưng mà bánh xe thì bây giờ họ vẫn chưa hiểu là cái bánh xe là cái gì cả, cho nên là anh phải giải thích tại sao ở tàu lại có bánh xe.
Ở thân tàu thì thường nó có những cái bánh xe mà treo đó để cho cái các chiếc tàu khác.
Tức là cái vỏ ngoài của cái lốp.
Dạ cái đó cái lốp.
And what happened to his colleagues, the 3 other people who did this boat with him?
Các đồng chí cùng tham gia đánh tàu với các đồng chí có bao nhiêu người bị hy sinh.
Coi như hiện nay các đồng chí là cũng thương tật còn ở tại đây giờ 3 đồng chí, còn bao nhiêu là đi công tác xa và cũng có số các đồng chí hy sinh.
I was always surrounded by officials.
No, I've had some. You have some. All right.
Comrade Long was the cultural commissar of Ben Tre.
Very good it is.
Thank you.
He wanted my journey to be a hymn to the glory of the revolution and a castigation of the United States and their so-called puppet regime.
And you? Have some coconut juice.
Thank you.
He was eager for me to see the victims of US chemical weapons. Fine, I said. But amongst those Comrade Long produced was a little boy with a deformed foot of the sort which can be seen all over the world. He was born long after the war ended, and the connection with chemicals was, to say the least, tenuous. I was terribly ashamed. He was being paraded by the party, but this was because vulgar television demanded a visible victim. We were the 7th foreign film crew for whom he had been produced. Defoliation was a very nasty form of warfare. American veterans have now been paid compensation for their exposure to chemicals. The Vietnamese have not.
Well, tell him I'm terribly sorry that
They should be.
been the cause of bringing his child here. I find it terribly upsetting that it's awful that the child should be a cripple anyway, and it's also awful that he has to spend his time seeing foreign camera teams like this. I apologize for upsetting the baby in this. Well, tell him to take the boy home to his family quickly and to stay
Thôi
there.
anh đi về, cho con đi về.
Vietnamese are spontaneously friendly, and most of them seemed glad to see Westerners again.
Thank you. Thank you.
But, as usual, the plainclothes police didn't want me to talk to them. The party doesn't show much confidence in the people. Once again, Tuk had to spend what seemed like hours arguing my case. She must have been inhibited by the policeman from Hanoi, whose job was only to report on her. Finally, I was allowed, under the ears of the police, to conduct an interview with a very nice goat herd.
Where's he taking his goats?
Anh mang mấy con khỉ này đi đâu đấy?
Dạ, mang từ Bến Tre lên Chợ Lách.
From Bến Tre to Chợ Lách.
Why did he have to take them all the way up to Chợ Lách? Is there no market for them in Ben Tre?
Not many secrets had been revealed when there was a technical rather than a political hitch. Five hours out of Ben Tre, the engine collapsed. The river, swollen with monsoon rains, would have swept us downstream. Fortunately, we were close to the bank, and we were able to make fast.
Are you taking off the whole gearbox and you lift it all out? Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. And then you put a new one in? A new one from somewhere else? Combien de temps vous croyez? 1 hour? That's okay. We'll see. I'll come back and see you again in 1 hour, see how you're getting on.
No one was disturbed. We just waited. I rather hoped we would be there for a very long time. It was a pleasant pause.
Merci.
Merci. Merci. Merci là Pháp.
Merci, thank you. Come on.
Cảm ơn.
Come on. Come on, merci, thank you. Oh. Yo Vietnam?
Vietnam.
Yo Vietnam?
Vô Vietnam.
Yo Vietnam. Yo Vietnam.
Anh.
Anh Yo Vietnam. Báo chí Anh Quốc Yo Vietnam.
Báo chí anh có vô Việt Nam, phải không? Phải không?
Yeah.
Cái gì?
Báo chí Anh Quốc
Chi.
Yo
Vietnam.
Việt Nam.
Spare parts are unobtainable in Vietnam. Mechanics are therefore brilliant.
Tưới rồi. Tưới mẹ em này nè.
Trong đây không thấy gì á.
Tưới thò tay vô.
Hình. Ai mà biết chứ là cái câu hồi mới
But I like to be artist.
You are not.
And I know
You're a
it's
perfectionist
very
in your work. Very artistic.
Coi.
Sadly, the repairs were done much quicker than I expected, and we clattered off into a monsoon storm, which had the wooden shutters go up and even the goats come down. Monsoon rains stop as suddenly as they start. The afternoon was dry again. I was sorry to leave the boat. It had been a revealing as well as an enjoyable day.
By nightfall, I was in the heart of the delta.
In Canto, I went to a little cafe where young people drink coffee in the evening and listen to pop music. It was very charming, but I'm afraid I had a furious argument about being controlled by the police. It's never wise to lose one's temper, particularly in Vietnam, where it's often seen as madness. But I did find it terribly frustrating not to be able to meet ordinary people without police supervision. Eventually, I was allowed to talk to some unselected and rather friendly people.
William. Yes.
I think we are journalists.
Yes, from London.
From London.
Yes. We are making a film of the Mekong.
In the old days, many people here spoke English. Now, it's rather rare.
I'm very, I'm very glad to meet you today.
Thank you. What is your name?
My name is
Anne. A-N-H. My name is William. What is your job? What is your work?
Ông Trinh đi dễ không? Ông Trinh dễ không?
What is your job?
Trinh dễ không? Trời. He's make a business. Business. He was business.
What do you do? Qu'est-ce que vous
Nó
faites?
đi làm
Votre
công nhân.
travail.
He's a worker. He's a worker.
Where do you work?
Làm việc.
Où est-ce que vous travaillez?
Làm việc
I'm
đâu?
sorry, my Vietnamese is hopeless. I don't speak any Vietnamese. I apologize. It was an enjoyable interlude. But I despaired of ever getting close to what was really happening in Vietnam today. Traveling in a cocoon of officials, I felt almost as isolated from reality as the Americans must have been. Or perhaps as the French before them. Excuse me, you speak English? You speak English? Vous parlez français? Bonjour monsieur. Ça va? Oui, ça va? Vous êtes français?
Oui, métis sont ça.
Métis?
Oui.
Ah, ça veut dire...
Papa français, maman, rien ami.
Ah, très bien. Mais vous êtes citoyen vietnamien?
Oui.
Ah, très bien, très bien. Alors, je dois aller à Chao Doc, à Kampuchea.
Oui.
Est-ce qu'il y a, ici, il y a un car, autobus à Chao Doc?
Ah oui, oui. Autobus, là, à côté d'ici.
Là-bas?
Oui, là-bas.
Ah bon. Très bien.
Canto is a busy river junction, but the war left good roads in the south, and I was asked to go by bus on the next stretch of the journey up through the fertile delta.
Ja, that's it. On left. You want the box? Okay, sure.
We passed through flooded rice fields at the end of harvest time. Since the end of the war, Vietnam has suffered some disastrous harvests, partly because of poor economic planning, partly because of very bad weather. This year, I was told, they were expecting a bumper crop. At the end of each monsoon, the country's natural treasure is brought to the roadside to be threshed and dried. The road is the only dry place. As we drove along the road, our tires crunching over the gold of Vietnam, I hoped that this year's harvest would be as good as predicted.
Tôi thích nói tiếng Việt. Không phải Liên Dầu. Không phải Liên Dầu. You're going to Chao Đốc?
Đi tới Thốt Nốt à? Đi
Hot Chop.
ở nhà nó Thốt Nốt.
Yeah. I see, I understand. And then, well, I'm going on to Chao Đốc, Phnom Penh.
Dạ.
Phnom Penh, Campuchia.
Dạ.
Campuchia?
Đi tới Campuchia hả? Gì vậy?
This is my Bible. Tôi thích nói tiếng Việt.
Không biết nghe.
Tôi phải đến đâu này.
For the rest of that day, I zigzagged my way by road and by river, by canal between the main branches of the Mekong, and through flooded fields beside a causeway towards the Cambodian border. A few weeks after I had passed, the waters would have receded, and these lakes would be dry fields again.
Finally, we arrived at Tan Chau, the last town before Cambodia, at dusk.
Next morning, Tuk and I were allowed, once more after long discussions, to take a real passenger boat up to the border.
Which boat is this? This one?
I thought, as I tried to maneuver myself into the overcrowded little cabin, that these boats must be real death traps when they sink. Could that be another reason why the party officials didn't want me aboard? I had no idea if I would be allowed through the border. My other guide, Hong, had flown ahead to Cambodia to seek permission for me to cross the frontier by river, something few Westerners have been able to do since 1975. There was reason to expect he would succeed. Vietnam now rules Cambodia. But I had heard nothing.
How are you? I'm very well, thank you.
I was very excited to be at the border at all.
Hello. Good morning. Good morning, John.
Cambodia is a country I have been writing about for a long time. It fills me both with affection and with foreboding. And it was so close now.
Không đi Campuchia được, chỉ ở trong nước Việt Nam thôi. Tới đây là biên giới Việt Nam Campuchia.
Frontier here, you can do not allow to go.
Yes, but there's no message from Phnom Penh saying, yes, please give me a visa. You have heard nothing?
No.
No? Oh dear, that's very disappointing. That means I have to go back to Saigon now.
Saigon now.
I've come all the way up on the river.
You can go by airplane.
From Saigon to Phnom Penh. Yeah, I'll have to do that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Come on. Come on. Back to the drawing board. Come on.
Now you return the bottom.
Yes, I'm afraid so. Thank you. Okay, please.
It was not a complete surprise, though I had thought that Hong would probably be able to insist to the Cambodians that I be allowed across.
So the first time we visit this market.
Yes, do you think the stuff is coming from Cambodia or going to, oh, that's Vietnamese whiskey?
No,
so that's
Vietnamese
to
whiskey.
Cambodia.
Yeah.
Took and I went to a village near the border. I thought that perhaps I would be able to buy at least a souvenir of Cambodia here.
This is the second time I visit.
Maybe that comes across the Thai border.
No.
Radio cassette.
Or left.
No, is this the full? Ah, this is the main market, I guess. Vietnamese sandals, nothing Cambodian. Ah, what about the cloth? No, it doesn't look like it.
But this came from the south, from
Levi
from
Strauss.
Ho Chi Minh City.
Levi's, San Francisco.
But not false, not
False
true.
ones, are they?
Saigon.
Made in Saigon, with Levi labels. Very, very smart.
As everywhere in Vietnam, the children wanted to flock around this weird-looking foreigner. I finally persuaded the overzealous policeman to let them, and we had some fun. I am afraid that once again my enthusiasm overcame my discretion, and as far as the police were concerned, I created an incident. Sometimes I think I should stay home.
Hong! Hong! Hey, Hong! Champion fixer!
It was as well we had not yet returned to Ho Chi Minh.
How did you do it, Hong?
Hong had indeed persuaded the Cambodians. He arrived in one of their makeshift gunboats.
Ça va bien. Je suis très heureux de vous revoir. Ça fait 2 ans.
He had sailed down the Mekong to pick me up with 2 Cambodian guides I already knew and liked a lot.
Champion.
Bắt tay đi.
Bonjour. Très bien de vous revoir.
Moi aussi.
Très heureux. Encore une fois à Cambodge.
I was sorry to say goodbye to the people of Vietnam, but I had been depressed by the nature of the state. Now I was going to see how the Vietnamese control another country, Cambodia. I have never lived long in Cambodia, but somehow the country's passion has engraved itself on my mind. Until 1970, Cambodia was a relatively peaceful peasant society. It had managed to stay out of its neighbors' wars. But in the 5 years that followed, the war spread across the country and up the Mekong. Cambodia was engulfed. American B-52s struck widely. Many soldiers of the corrupt regime, carelessly backed by America, fought bravely, but the fundamentalist Khmer Rouge communists, allied to Hanoi, grew, and in 1975 they captured Phnom Penh. They emptied the city at gunpoint and embarked on a bloody communist revolution. For over 3 years, the towns were void. Under the harsh discipline of Khmer Rouge cadres, the population was enslaved in the fields. Probably well over 1 million of Cambodia's 7 million people died or were murdered by the party. The Khmer Rouge also attacked Cambodia's historical enemy, Vietnam. This gave the Vietnamese a reason to invade Cambodia at the end of 1978. It was a liberation for the Cambodians, but since then it has also become an occupation. Still today, Vietnam governs the country in the name of a client regime.
Baby boom.
I asked my friend Kim Tick from this regime's foreign ministry if things were better now.
C'est vrai qu'il y a beaucoup de bébés maintenant?
Bien sûr, il y a beaucoup de bébés, mais à présent, la population augmente à peu près de 7 millions.
7 millions maintenant, ça c'est
même à
fantastique.
Phnom Penh, nous avons plus de 600 000.
600 000? C'est extraordinaire parce que c'était vide. C'était vide il y a...
628 000 et quelques.
I love Phnom Penh. The town does now have a bustle and the air of ordinary life. And people are extraordinarily resilient. They need to be to have survived at all the recent horrors. There are still traces of the leisurely spirit of pre-war Cambodia under its eclectic ruler, Prince Sihanouk. Despite his faults, he succeeded in keeping war at bay until his overthrow in 1970. Good times are to be had now in Phnom Penh. But still, life seemed to me fragile, the calm, skin deep. Those who have moved back seem to be camping rather than living. Everything seemed impermanent. The United Nations, anxious not to legitimize the use of invasion to solve international disputes, has refused to recognize Vietnam's client regime. So, no UN development aid gets to the people. Disaster relief aid given after the Vietnamese takeover has ended. Today, hospitals still have no water, the town has no electricity. While the politics remain deadlocked, the people still suffer. The Vietnamese blame everything on the Khmer Rouge. They go to great lengths to ensure that no one forgets their crimes. They have set up unnecessarily exaggerated museums and open-air displays of bones, which I think should now be decently buried. A growing number of Cambodians seem to me to dislike Vietnamese rule, but it is still by far the lesser of two evils.
Before 1975, I was a student at the Faculty of Literature in Phnom Penh. When the Khmer Rouge came into Phnom Penh, they expelled all the population out of the city. Pol Pot men forced the people to labor, to work, 16 hours a day. At the time, most people were sick, and then some of them died of disease and of hunger. When I was in the north, I didn't know very much about my family, but after the liberation, I came back to Phnom Penh, and then I came across my older brother, and he told me that my father was killed, my mother died of hunger, and also my youngest sister was killed.
Why were your father and sister killed?
And that's what I didn't know, because my brother told me that my younger sister, she's married to another man, at that time. And then because at that time, that he didn't work hard.
She didn't work hard?
No, her husband didn't work hard. And then, they took her husband to kill. Also, they took my sister to kill.
Why was your older brother killed?
Because he got a stomach ache and he didn't do any work. And they saw that it is useless to feed my brother. So they decided to kill him.
It's a terrible story.
Yes, terrible.
The Khmer Rouge are still a threat. They frequently attack this train to Battambang. Together with non-communist groups, they have been built up along the Thai border by Vietnam's enemies. Ironically, they have widespread diplomatic support in the rest of the world because the Vietnamese invasion was a breach of the UN Charter. The Americans, the British, and most other governments still enable the Khmer Rouge, now in unhappy coalition with Sihanouk and with nationalist groups, to hold Cambodia's UN seat. I was quite glad not to be allowed on the train, but it was heading in the same direction as me. Instead, I went to the port. There, I wanted to find a boat going upriver towards the Great Lake, which lies across the core of the country and teems with fish, Cambodia's main source of protein. Still with Tuk from Hanoi Television, and with a charming Cambodian guide, I looked for the steamer.
Siem Reap Angkor. Siem Reap Angkor.
How much is this?
100 yen each.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 100. It was all much easier to arrange than in Vietnam.
Very good. Okay, let's go on board.
No secret policeman either. I was very happy.
Goodbye.
During the Khmer Rouge years, such journeys were impossible. People were imprisoned in the cooperative villages to which they had been assigned, usually far from their original homes. The captain had concealed his identity. Many people with glasses were killed as intellectuals. He worked in the fields. The boat was laid up. The boat was filled with fishermen who had come down from the lake and Angkor Wat to sell dried fish in Phnom Penh.
Dans les années de Pol Pot, vous étiez aussi pêcheur?
Je suis cultivateur.
Cultivateur. C'était bon ou non?
Non, c'est pas bon.
Pas bon.
They were relaxed. Looking at this pleasant scene, I found it very hard to remember that the Khmer Rouge were a specifically Cambodian phenomenon, recruited from ordinary people just such as these. During the rainy season, the over-swollen river here actually reverses itself and backs up into the Great Lake, one of the wonders of the world.
In the rainy, dry season, it's about 1 meter. 1 meter 20.
And in the rainy season?
In the rainy season, it's 8 meter deep.
Good heavens, here comes some food. Captain, it's your lunch. C'est votre déjeuner, mon capitaine. Pour manger.
Get some at the table.
For me too?
Yeah.
Good heavens, that's fantastic. Roast chicken and crab soup. Wow! It's so marvelous. Good Lord, rice.
Rainy season, 8 meters.
8 meters deep and 1.5 meters in the dry season. That's a big difference. This is only about... Is it a private boat? Does it belong to
government?
Government boat. What's this boat called?
This boat?
Yes.
Jan Surya. Jan means the moon. Surya means the sun.
So the boat is called Sun and Moon.
Sun and moon travel at
It's a
night and daytime.
The sun and moon would take 2 days to reach Angkor. I had to leave her reluctantly before she got to the Great Lake. Too many Khmer Rouge, I was told. Even at this poor fishing village, I was heavily guarded.
At this time of year, the rainy season, people wait for the water to fall. Then the fish will be easily caught in superbly crafted traps and nets. Cambodians wisely do not exert themselves unnecessarily.
Buddhism was the essence of pre-war Cambodian society. The Khmer Rouge tried to eradicate it. The Vietnamese limit it. Today, only old men can become monks. They are government appointees. Cambodian friends of mine complain that their sermons now are propaganda. At this stage, I had to pause. I was now on the southern edge of the Great Lake. Angkor Wat was on the other side. I stayed in a government guest house, wondering in the monsoon heat if there was any way I would get there. Since both roads and river were said to be under Khmer Rouge attack, it would be difficult. Eventually, I was allowed to make a flying visit to Angkor in a 20-year-old Soviet helicopter of the Vietnamese army. Being a coward, I did not greatly enjoy it. I kept thinking of what the GIs called the Jesus nut, which was holding the rotor to the body of this ancient animal. We flew over the Great Lake and all the woods and fields it had flooded. I was so terrified that I couldn't tell where the lake ended and the land began. And then we arrived at the magnificent temples themselves. They were built between the 11th and 13th centuries, at a time when the Cambodians ruled the entire region. The French explorer who rediscovered Angkor in the 19th century wrote that the first glimpse of it through the trees transports the traveler as if by enchantment from barbarism to civilization, from profound darkness to light. Angkor is undoubtedly impressive, but many of its carved images are filled with the violence of the empire it represented, and which in some ways was copied by the Khmer Rouge. The kings of Angkor engaged in endless and finally losing wars with their neighbors, Siam, now Thailand, to the west, and Vietnam to the east. Still today, Cambodia is caught between the two in an endless tug of war. Both Angkor and the Khmer Rouge attempted also to harness the massive waters of Cambodia. Each was a system of hydraulic despotism. Each was cruel, each failed. The Khmer Rouge very quickly. Today, the great reservoirs of Angkor are overgrown. The Cambodians have often depicted the Vietnamese as crocodiles intent on devouring Cambodia. On my journey, I met Cambodians who talked with increasing impatience of the way in which the Vietnamese now control every aspect of life. But no one wanted a return to Khmer Rouge slavery. The Vietnamese have allowed them no third choice. They should have a choice. Endless occupation is no decent solution. The Cambodians deserve better than that. Here, as far as I was going under Vietnamese supervision, I was guarded. It was the end of one stage of my journey. The first French explorers of the Mekong in the mid-19th century had hoped that it would prove a river road to China, but they came to unnavigable falls at the border of Cambodia and Laos. The same river road proved impassable for me too, but this time the reasons were political. From Angkor, I flew by a circuitous route dictated by those political reasons to northern Thailand to rejoin the Mekong, where it emerges from the gorges of Laos and forms the border between Laos and Thailand. It was a culture shock. Straight out of impoverished communist Indochina to the relative prosperity and freedom of Thailand. Unlike in Vietnam and Cambodia, there are great riches in Thailand. There is a prosperous middle class. Unlike in Indochina, there is a lot of foreign money. The economy is growing. But there is also rural poverty. Poor hill tribes people come shopping in a little town where other people buy video recorders. The Thais, like the Cambodians, are Buddhist. But here, Buddhism is not restrained by Marxism. Thailand is probably the freest country in Southeast Asia. Over the river lies Laos. This used to be a busy border crossing. It has been closed since the communist victory in 1975. Even so, hundreds of thousands of Laos have used the Mekong as a bridge and illegally crossed it as refugees. The Vietnamese had hoped that I could travel up the river through Laos to demonstrate their idea of the river of solidarity. But although Vietnam does now dominate Laos, the Lao like to show some independence, and so they refused Vietnam's request for a visa for me. On the Thai side, I was at last allowed to take a boat with no police, no guards, no guides, no restraints whatsoever. I took a local speedboat, which was driven by a dipsomaniac. He was supposed to control a huge Datsun car engine. For breakfast, he had had 2 bottles of Thai whiskey, which, appropriately, is called Mekong whiskey. This last stage of my journey to the northern tip of Thailand, just below China, was, in a way, the most alarming.
water was boiling and roiling here. Although we were fighting against the current, we travelled at about 30 miles an hour. I could scarcely breathe in the slipstream. I adored it. The mists covered the mountains most of the day, but in the afternoon a weak sun broke through to glimmer on the river as I reached the end of my journey. A fabulous spot known as the Golden Triangle, where Thailand, Burma and Laos all come down to sip together on the Mekong. It is a place of very great beauty. On the water's edge, I had a meal with the boatman and his family.
And do many people come from Laos?
Oh, no, not too many now, you know. Before, when it's new communist, it's every night, you know, they come across to Thailand. And now it's someday when they open the market.
And before? In the old days?
All day, yes.
People from Thailand and Laos
Yes,
go
yes.
back?
We can cross the river, we can drinking over there.
You used to go?
Yes, everybody can go before.
Not now?
Not now, no more. If you going, yes, you can go, but you can come back.
You see, there's a rainbow there. Do you think it's from Laos to Thailand?
Oh, because just half, you know. So
Maybe it's a bridge over the Mekong.
Yes, maybe the bridge.
The only bridge.
Yeah, only bridge.
There's never been a bridge, has there? How far is it up there to China?
From here, it's about 60 kilometers.
Not so far.
Not so far yet. If you walking, it's 16 days by walking.
How about by boat?
Oh, I think it's difficult, you know. Impossible.
Can we go by boat?
No, impossible. Yes, you can go, but if you have the gasoline for the boat.
With enough gasoline, we can go.
Yeah, but
Okay. After lunch.
After lunch, yeah.
China wasn't really on. I decided to stay in this lovely place. That evening, I lay on my bamboo bed by the riverside, listening to the Mekong as it rushed past me, on to Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam. No river of solidarity, but one which sadly divides rather than unites the region. I knew that even now in the Delta, refugees would be setting off in frail boats on to the dark South China Sea, hoping to escape life under the surveillance of white-shirted policemen. And I thought how terribly lucky, how extraordinarily privileged I was.